I've been caving for years, and I always go alone. It's not about proving something, it's about quiet. No chatter bouncing off the walls, no impatient buddy rushing me. Just me, the stone, and the air that feels older than anything else in the world. I'd heard rumors about a cave in the foothills outside town. No maps, no signage. The kind of place ranchers told their kids to stay away from. Supposedly, it went down deeper than anyone had bothered to explore. That was all I needed to know. I found the entrance by accident more than design. Just a slit in the earth under a tangle of mesquite, wide enough for a body if you crawled. The air that drifted out was cold, still, and carried the smell of rust. I clipped on my helmet, adjusted my light, and went in. The first 100 feet were a belly crawl. My chest scraped rock, my shoulders jammed in places, and the earth pressed down like it wanted me to stop. By the time the crawl opened into a vertical drop, I was sweating and grinning, heart pounding with the thrill of it. I set an anchor, rappelled 30 feet down into a chamber, and pulled the rope free behind me. The room smelled wrong. Stale, yes, but with something heavier beneath it. A sweetness, like spoiled meat. There were 3 tunnels leading out. I picked the one to the left. The passage narrowed, widened, then narrowed again. My boots scraped, my pack banged against the walls. I found a set of gouges carved into the limestone, deep and deliberate. Not fossils, not erosion. Cuts. Long grooves like someone had dragged a knife down the wall. That was the first time I hesitated. The air got thicker the deeper I went. Not thin, like you'd expect underground. Thick. My lamp beam cut through floating dust motes, and in the silence I started to hear water dripping somewhere ahead. After maybe another half mile, the tunnel spat me into a chamber. My light swept the floor, and I froze. It was covered in bones. Not animal, human. They weren't ancient either. Some still had shoes on. One had a nylon jacket slumped around its shoulders. The fabric rotting but recognizable. A skull with a baseball cap still perched on it grinned up at me. My chest tightened. I backed toward the tunnel, thinking maybe I could leave right then, but rock rained from the ceiling with the sound of a gunshot. The way I came in crumbled shut, a slab sealing it like a tomb. I was trapped. The only way forward was deeper. I forced myself through a narrow crawl that scraped my pack and tore skin off my forearms. When it opened into another passage, I smelled it stronger. Rot, not just old bones, something fresh. I followed the stench until I found them. 3 bodies stacked against the wall. Men, jeans, boots, shirts stiff with dried blood. Their throats had been cut, and their faces were already bloated. One still had duct tape around his wrists. My lamp flickered over them, and that's when I noticed the tarp. It was folded in the corner, stained dark. Beside it was a shovel. The realization hit me so hard I thought I'd vomit in my mask. This wasn't just a cave. It was a dumping ground. I was standing in someone's graveyard. My light caught something else, boot prints in the dirt. Fresh. The sound reached me seconds later. Voices, real ones this time. I killed my lamp and pressed myself into the wall, heart slamming. The voices echoed down the tunnel, Spanish words bouncing closer, footsteps crunching gravel. Men. I realized too late that the bodies weren't just abandoned, they'd been left. Because whoever used this place planned to come back. And I was still inside. I crawled backward as quietly as I could, scraping against stone. The voices got louder, a flashlight beam cutting through the dark behind me. Panic took over. I bolted down the first side passage I found, not caring where it went. My pack banged, rocks tore skin off my arms, but I kept moving. The tunnel narrowed into a squeeze so tight I had to exhale completely just to force my ribs through. I clawed at the dirt, praying the men hadn't heard me. Then light splashed across the wall just behind my boots. Voices shouted. One barked orders. I shoved myself forward until I popped into another chamber. My chest heaved, dirt in my mouth. My lamp showed another tunnel, narrow, winding upward. I scrambled through it on hands and knees, scraping, gasping, every sound behind me magnified. At last, I saw daylight, a pale shaft of it leaking through cracks in the ceiling ahead. I climbed toward it, bleeding, desperate, and jammed my fingers into the fissure. It widened with a crack of breaking stone, and I shoved my body through. I spilled out into the open air, gasping, covered in dirt and blood. The sinkhole spat me into the brush maybe 50 yards from where I'd gone in. I didn't look back. I ran through the woods until I hit the road, lungs burning, every sound behind me a phantom footstep. I never reported it. Who would I even tell? The cops. They'd ask why I was there, alone, with no permission, and even if they believed me, whoever used that cave would know someone had been inside. I've seen tight squeezes, underground rivers, drop-offs into blackness that could swallow you whole. But nothing like that, because rock can't kill you. People can. And in that cave, I know I was one mistake away from being just another body on the pile. I thought I understood fear before I went into that cave. I've been in tight crawl spaces. I've been 40 feet underground with nothing but my headlamp between me and a black void, but none of that compares to what happened that night. Nothing compares to watching a friend vanish into rock as if the earth itself decided it was done with him. The cave wasn't even supposed to be remarkable. That was the point. We weren't professionals, just weekend explorers with more enthusiasm than sense. Most caves in the region were well documented, mapped out by spelunking clubs decades ago. We wanted something new, something that felt like discovery. The land we chose had been tied up in probate for years after the owner died. Old farmland, sagging fences, a crumbling house nobody touched. A developer had finally bought it, and rumors said they were planning to bulldoze the area in a month or two. That meant we had one chance. I went with 3 others. Drew, my best friend since middle school. Mark, a guy we'd only been out with twice before, and his girlfriend, Lacey. She was small, wiry, with that reckless streak people confuse for bravery. Mark was all swagger, loud, cocky, the kind of guy who jokes non-stop until the moment something serious happens, then shuts down completely. The cave entrance was barely a cave at all. Just a long, jagged crack in the limestone bluff, mostly hidden by vines and trash trees. Getting inside meant sliding down a 45-degree slope of loose rock. Once you were past the daylight, you were committed. Climbing back out wasn't impossible, but it wasn't easy either. Inside, the air shifted immediately. Still, stale, that mineral tang that dries out your tongue. The kind of silence you don't notice right away until someone coughs or shifts their boots and you realize there's nothing else. No wind, no insects. Just us. We geared up. Helmets, lamps, knee pads. Nobody said it out loud, but we all felt it. That uneasy tingle in your gut when you know you've crossed into a place meant to stay hidden. The first chamber wasn't impressive. 15 feet across, ceiling low enough we had to stoop. We expected it to dead end. But Mark, always the one sniffing around for hidden treasure, spotted a hole in the back wall. Just a slit, angled downward, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. My stomach dropped the moment I saw it. I've always hated squeezes. You lie there with stone pressing your chest, every exhale shrinking the space around you, every inhale reminding you how thin the air feels. Rationally, you know you'll fit, but your body doesn't care about rational. Looks tight, I muttered. Mark grinned. That's how you know it's worth it. Drew glanced at me, raising his eyebrows. He didn't like it either, but neither of us wanted to be the coward. And Lacey was already dropping to her knees, lamp beam vanishing into the slit. The crawl was worse than it looked. 20 feet of elbows and knees grinding against rock, head turned sideways just to fit. By the time we squeezed through, I was slick with sweat, heart pounding like I'd sprinted uphill. But then the tunnel opened up, and I forgot my panic. The chamber we entered was vast, far bigger than anything we expected. Our lamps barely reached the ceiling, 50 feet above. Stalactites hung like teeth. The floor stretched out into darkness, crunching under our boots with gravel and ancient dust. And there were markings. At first, I thought they were natural striations, but the longer I looked, the clearer they became. Carvings. Deep grooves in the stone. Lines clustered in groups of 5 like tallies. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. Some fresh enough to still have sharp edges, others smoothed by time. Jesus, Drew whispered. We found more as we spread our beams, circles, triangles, crude crosses. At the far wall, a blackened pit that might have been a fire ring. Scattered around it, pale fragments, bone, too big for animals. I wanted out. Every nerve in my body screamed we shouldn't be there. Mark laughed, though it was too loud, too forced. Teenagers. Had a little satanic campout or something. But he was wrong. Those marks were old. Older than spray paint. Older than flashlights. The fire pit was choked with dust, the bones half buried in silt. Whoever had been there a long time ago. Before I could argue, Drew's lamp caught something else. A passage in the far wall. Not a natural crack. A cut opening. Perfectly square, 3 feet across, edges sharp as if done with tools. We stood there, silent, the four of us staring at that impossible doorway. "Holy shit," Mark whispered, his grin flickering back. "This is it. This is what we came for." Lacey was already moving toward it. Drew muttered, "Bad idea." And I should have backed him. Should have said it wasn't worth it. But curiosity has a way of blinding you. So we went. The square passage was tighter than the first. The walls scraped our helmets, our shoulders. The slope dropped fast, forcing us onto hands and knees, boots slipping on loose stone. The air grew worse, sour, metallic, like rusted pipes. After 30 feet, it opened again, but this chamber was different. Smaller. Low ceiling that forced us to crouch, and the walls, flat, squared, not natural, like a room cut into the rock. The floor was scattered with debris, rusted cans, scraps of cloth stiff with rot, bits of wire, things too decayed to identify, and in one corner, a cairn, a pile of rocks stacked waist high. Something about it froze me in place. It wasn't random collapse. It was deliberate. I edged closer despite myself, lamp beam catching on something caught between the stones. A scrap of blue denim, frayed. My hand moved before my brain caught up. I pulled it free. It was the corner of a pant leg, stiff with age. The smell hit instantly. Rot. Thick, clinging, like a butcher's bin left in summer. Drew gagged, Lacey cursed, Mark cursed louder, and then we heard it, a sound from deeper in the chamber. Scrape. Every headlamp swung. Nothing. Just black shadows pressed against stone. Scrape. Shuffle. Not rockfall. Not an echo. Movement. My blood turned to ice. There shouldn't have been anything alive back there. Nothing with room to move. Mark hissed, "It's probably just a..." The sound cut him off. Louder now. Closer. We backed toward the passage. Nobody wanted to turn, but nobody wanted to stay either. Our boots slipped on gravel, helmets smacking stone. The scraping grew faster. Desperate, like something dragging itself forward. Drew went first, shoving into the tunnel. Lacey after him. I followed, heart hammering. Mark brought up the rear. The crawl was chaos, elbows cracking, knees tearing skin. My lungs burned. Behind me, Mark grunted, cursing under his breath. Then he screamed. Not words. Just raw, panicked sound. I twisted, lamp beam cutting back, but the tunnel behind me was empty. No light, no Mark. "Mark!" Lacey screamed, voice high and cracking. Drew shouted too. I just shoved upward, scraping my body against the rock, desperate to get out. We burst into the big chamber and didn't stop. Crawled, scrambled, dragged ourselves through the slit and out into the first chamber. Our breaths came ragged, shallow. My skin was raw from stone, my chest tight. We didn't stop until we collapsed outside, sprawled in the weeds under the stars. Mark never came out. We went back the next day with ropes, cameras, more lights. The sheriff came too, after Lacey broke down and begged, but the cut passage was gone. The chamber was still there. The carvings, the fire circle, the bones. But where the square opening had been, there was nothing but solid limestone. We scoured the walls, hammered, tested with chisels. It wasn't blocked. It wasn't collapsed. It had never been there. That was what the sheriff said anyway. He told us caves play tricks, said we were lucky not to get lost ourselves. His report called it disorientation and panic under stress. But I know what I saw. I know where Mark was when he screamed, and I know the cave wanted him. It started as a stupid dare. Not the kind where you brag about it later, but the kind that, when you actually agree to it, makes your stomach knot in a mix of adrenaline and fear. A group of us, me, Alex, Carmen, and Nate, were wandering around a remote part of the Appalachian Mountains, bored and looking for something dangerous enough to feel alive. That's when Nate mentioned the Hollow Cave, which had a reputation among the locals. Officially, it was off limits, though no one really knew why. Unofficially, it was supposedly haunted or cursed, depending on which old-timers you asked. That part didn't matter to us. What mattered was the thrill. The entrance was hidden behind thick overgrowth, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. When we found it, the opening was a jagged black slit in the rock, the kind of place where the shadows seemed heavier than usual. I don't know what I expected. maybe a vast cavern with sparkling stalactites or eerie underground rivers, but what greeted us was a narrow tunnel that forced us to squeeze sideways, our shoulders scraping against cold stone. The air was stale, almost metallic, and I felt a sudden chill crawling up my spine. We rigged headlamps and helmets and decided to go in anyway. I led the way, feeling the smooth rock walls with my hands, guiding the others through tight bends and low ceilings. After about 10 minutes, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. It wasn't large, barely enough room for all four of us, but the ceiling stretched far enough to feel suffocatingly high in the dark. The walls were covered in streaks of something dark, moisture, probably, but it caught the light in a way that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Alex, who always tried to act brave, shined his light across the room. "This is it," he said, voice echoing. "Feels smaller than I imagined." Carmen rolled her eyes, and Nate muttered something about needing to turn back, but no one moved. Something about the cave made hesitation seem like a weakness. I knew better, but I didn't say anything. That's when we found the first trap. I don't know what I expected, but I wasn't expecting a rope. It was old, frayed, and stretched across the floor of a narrow passage leading deeper into the cave. At first, we thought it was some sort of climbing gear left behind by spelunkers, but when we touched it, the rope vibrated. Not a movement caused by wind or passing water. Actual vibration, like something underneath it was alive. We froze, staring at it. Nate, being the idiot he was, laughed nervously and tapped it. The rope twitched violently under his fingers, as if it had snapped to life. Then it went still again. Carmen whispered that we should leave. Alex, of course, insisted we keep going, and I followed, partly because I didn't want to look like a coward, but mostly because something deep inside me wanted to see what was down there. We went further. The cave narrowed and curved, forcing us to bend low and crawl on hands and knees. That's when the air changed. It grew heavier, denser, like inhaling water. The smell hit next, iron and decay. My stomach churned, but I pushed forward. We finally emerged into a massive chamber, bigger than anything we'd imagined. Shadows stretched in every direction, thrown by our headlamps, creating shapes that shouldn't have existed. The walls here were carved, not natural formations, but deliberate marks, deep grooves running vertically and horizontally, some intersecting in patterns that made no sense. Whoever or whatever had done this had spent decades, maybe centuries here. Then we saw them. Small, skeletal shapes huddled against the walls, dozens of them. At first, I thought they were bones left behind by animals or some previous explorers, but as my light passed over them, I realized they were dolls. Not the kind you see in stores, but crudely made human figures, twisted and stitched from scraps of cloth, sticks, and hair. Some were missing limbs. Others had eyes that were black holes, stitched with thick thread. Carmen gagged and turned away. Alex just stared, mouth open. Nate whispered that we should leave. That's when we heard the first sound, a soft scratching coming from deeper in the cave. Not wind or water, but deliberate, like nails on stone. It was slow at first, intermittent, then faster, closer. I shined my light toward the sound, and we all froze. There, emerging from the shadows, was a narrow passage leading downwards, impossibly dark. From it came a figure, or something pretending to be a figure. Tall, thin, hunched over, moving in jerky, unnatural motions. Its skin, it wasn't skin. It was raw, pale, and stretched tight over the bones. It had no face, just a smooth expanse where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. But we knew it was watching. We felt it watching. Panic hit us all at once. We ran, blindly, screaming over each other. The cave seemed to twist, passages rearranging as we went. Nothing looked familiar anymore. I tripped and fell on the wet stone floor, cutting my hands badly. Carmen helped me up, but by the time we got to the next junction, Nate was missing. We shouted his name, but the only response was the echo of our own voices bouncing back at us, distorted and warped. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I had no sense of time. The cave played tricks on our senses. The air thickened, our lights flickered, and the dolls seemed to move, rearranging themselves when we weren't looking. Every corner we turned, every passage we crawled through, the sense of being hunted grew. I realized that the rope from before hadn't been a trap. It had been a marker, guiding us towards something. And that something was aware of us. Finally, Alex and I stumbled into a chamber that smelled of rot and iron. In the center was a pit, deep and wide. Around it were symbols etched into the floor, some kind of ritualistic patterns. At the edge of the pit was a ladder, old and rusted, leading down into the darkness. I wanted to turn back, but Alex, ever the idiot, pointed down and said, "This has to be it. This is where it ends." We climbed down. The pit opened into a space unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was enormous, like an underground cathedral, with a ceiling too high to see. And at the far end, crouched like a predator, was the thing that had been following us. Only now we saw it fully. Dozens of those dolls, all moving in a writhing mass, crawling toward it, attaching themselves to its arms and legs. The figure raised its head, or what passed for a head, and we saw faint indentations where eyes might have been, just hollow, but somehow expressive. It stared at us. I don't remember how we ran. We didn't scream, we didn't look back, we just ran. The cave seemed endless, twisting corridors repeating themselves. I tripped and slid down a steep embankment, blood mixing with mud on the walls. Alex grabbed my arm, yanking me up. I realized then that Nate wasn't coming. We had to keep moving, or we'd end up like him, or worse. We finally found the entrance, overgrown and hidden. The sunlight hit my face like a burning knife. I staggered out, gasping, bleeding, shaking. Alex was pale, but grinning in a manic way. Neither of us spoke at first. The forest around us was quiet, almost absurdly so. It felt unreal. We never spoke about it after that. I tried to explain it to people later, but who would believe dolls that moved on their own or a humanoid creature living deep underground controlling them? We never went back, and I hope we never will. The hollow cave is still there, hidden, waiting. And sometimes when the wind blows just right through the trees, I swear I hear scratching coming from beneath the earth. But that's not the part that terrifies me. What terrifies me is knowing that there are places humans weren't meant to find. Places where someone, or something, has already been waiting, patiently, for us to stumble in.